About a year ago, a member of this congregation won the sermon topic that I give to our annual service auction. It's a great way to support the congregation while also choosing a topic that might challenge me as your minister, maybe something that's a little bizarre or odd, or even just to lift up something that you're passionate about that you've not heard me preach about as your minister. And so upon winning this, this member told me that she was going to choose the most inappropriate and scandalous topic that she could think of. But in the end, she chose politics, and specifically the question, is there a right choice in politics for Unitarian Universalists? Now, some of you might hear the word politics and go, well, that is scandalous. Churches are never, ever supposed to talk about politics in any way, shape, or form. We're supposed to perpetually be in a neutral gray area. Well, that's a misconception. I want to briefly tell you about something called the Johnson Amendment. And in the Johnson Amendment, it says that there's one clear prohibition against churches and specifically ministers when it comes to politics. It states that ministers and churches cannot electioneer or campaign. That's it. So what that means is that I cannot get up in the pulpit and say, dear members and friends of UUCL, you must support this candidate over this candidate, this party over that party. And it also means as a church body, we cannot do the same as well. But beyond this, there's a lot of freedom left in the political realm for us to dig deep into as a church and as Unitarian Universalists. And so there is great freedom for us to look at the policies of the federal government and say that the current immigration policies are unjust, unethical, and completely against what Unitarian Universalism is about. And so we can look at any policy, any law, and we can make the same determination. Is this something Unitarian Universalists can support? Or is this something Unitarian Universalists are called with our hearts and minds to the work of justice to counter or affirm even? And so in that freedom, we are definitely political. We can certainly dig into things. We have the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, and the 8th principle we've adopted here at this congregation are 6 sources and a very rich history as Unitarians, Universalists, and now Unitarian Universalists to inform us when we're looking at the world of the political. And so I want to briefly talk to you about someone named A. Paul Davies. A. Paul Davies, many of you know, is one of my minister heroes, and he was born in 1902 in Wales. And I'm going to skip through a lot of his life here, but he, of course, went to seminary in England, and he immediately was one of those seminary students that was questioning orthodoxy and questioning the creeds. And he'd eventually find himself here in the United States serving congregations in Maine. And one of my favorite stories about A. Paul Davies is that he went on sort of a mini sabbatical where he decided to leave the pulpit for a while, and he became a used car salesman in a town a few towns over. And he did this as an experiment. He wanted to see if you could be a used car salesman while also being a Christian, given the current business practices of the time. And he concluded at the end of that experiment that you could not be a Christian and a used car salesman at the same time. And that was a scandalous experiment for him. It made the papers. The used car business decried what he did. And eventually, in his career, he would come to Unitarianism. And he would become one of our most prominent preachers. And he would go on to serve All Souls in Washington, D.C. And so the reason I lift up his life is because he put everything on the line for his ministry and for the call to serve Unitarianism. And so his congregation supported him, and I'm sure some people didn't support him in his political activities. But when he was most active was when McCarthyism was at its height. And he decried McCarthyism while at the same time going against communism as well. And so he felt that to be religious was to be political. And he has this great quote that he lifted up. And it begins with a very challenging piece that we'll dig into a little bit. A. Paul Davies once said that, "For America's real religion is the world's real religion, the only religion that can save us and heal our dissensions." Now you might hear the first part of this quote and go, America's religion is the world's religion. What is that about? And the challenging piece about A. Paul Davies is that he became fiercely political, fiercely loyal to the American way of life. And in 2020, we wrestle with those things. What does that mean? Is that colonialist? Is that imperialist? What does this mean for us to say America's way is the way? And that's a challenge for me as someone that looks up to him as a model preacher and minister. But the quote continues, and this is what I think is great about this quote. He continues, "For the faith upon which democracy is based is the victory of truth over superstition, of liberty over servitude, of the universal over the provincial, of love over fear." Now, when we dig into that second half, that is where we find our call in the political as Unitarian Universalists. How are we affirming truth over superstition and lies? How are we affirming liberty over servitude? How are we affirming the universal over the provincial? And most importantly, how are we lifting up love over fear? That is our call to the political. And so when we dig into politics and we have this in our mind, we have our fifth principle, which lifts up the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. When we look at all of this, including our history and our 8 principles and our 6 sources, when we look at all of this, we can look at the policies of our federal government, we can look at the policies of politicians and boards and committees, and we can say, yes, this is what we need more of in our lives, or no, this is something we absolutely reject. Now, A. Paul Davies was living in the time of McCarthyism and also great political strife in our world. And we are also living in a very different time. When this question was first posed to me, it felt like everyone and their mother was running for the Democratic primary. There were even some other Republican contenders on that side of the political spectrum. And it felt like there were so many choices. How could someone possibly choose if they were specifically a progressive, but even just in general? It felt like there's a new candidate every day, no matter where you looked politically. But now we're living in the world of coronavirus. A pandemic that is changing how we live, how we meet as a church, how we move about our daily lives. And it's changing the way that we look at politics as well. For me to ask the question, is there a right choice in politics, means which politicians are making decisions in this pandemic that might save lives and support the health of our nation during this pandemic? That is the question that I am asking as I look at the political world right now. And I know I've come to an answer of where am I finding politicians and leaders that are affirming my life, the life of those I've loved, and the life of those in my community, and specifically this church as well. But also, the question that I'm wrestling with here is, I don't think we should be asking, is there a right choice as Unitarian Universalists? I think that we should be saying, no matter what our choice is, can we reconcile that choice with the principles and purposes of Unitarian Universalism at the end of the day? That's the challenge for all of us. That's the challenge for me as the minister. That's the challenge for you as a congregation member, as someone who's chosen this path to be a Unitarian Universalist. And so that is the question we have to wrestle with in this time, during this pandemic, as we are worried about our health and safety, and as we're worried about the future of the country and the world that we live in. And so that is the challenge for all of you in this time. Can you reconcile your choices politically with Unitarian Universalism? And it may be that sometimes you cannot fully reconcile those choices. And that is a hard thing for us to wrestle with. But we need to wrestle with it. We need to figure out what is the common good we need to support as Unitarian Universalists. How will our values and our ethics come alive more fully in the world? And all of this is through the lens of the time that we're living in, right here and right now. And so is there a right choice? I throw that question back to you. How will you wrestle with this during the time we're living in and in the days to come? Blessed be. Amen.